Well, hello everyone. This is a literature check-in. Now that you have finished all the way through part 3 of Johnny Tremain, I just kind of wanted to check in with you and sort of summarize what's happened, make sure you're understanding the main events of the story, and give you a couple of questions to think about as you continue reading part 4 this week. You'll notice that I have a different background for my video here today. It's such a lovely sunny day that I thought it would be nice to make a video on the deck. So I hope you're able to get outside in this beautiful weather a little bit as well and enjoy the sunshine. All right, well, we finished reading all the way up through part 3. And hopefully you've noticed that Johnny's world has changed dramatically since the beginning of the story. As a result of his terrible accident, making the basin for Mr. Hancock and his injury, he is no longer able to work as a silversmith. And I'm sure you noticed in part 3 that his position in the Lapham household has changed and fallen dramatically. So if you'll remember at the beginning of the story, he was a valued member of the household who not only did he have the main silversmithing duties, but he was really just kind of in charge of pretty much everything. And Mrs. Lapham really respected him and counted on him and valued him. And as you can see by the end of part 3, her attitude towards him has changed dramatically. She shames Johnny. She makes terrible predictions that he'll end up in jail. She insists that he, go out and find another job. He can't be a silversmith anymore. She now is assigning him all of the unskilled chores that before he was too skilled to take on, such as sweeping and fetching charcoal and things like that. And I'm sure you remember when you read that when Johnny went to go find another job, there wasn't really much that he could do with a crippled hand. He tried many different, visiting many different merchants or different shops and could not, of course, be hired with a crippled hand. So he's really hit a low spot here at this part of the story. We also met some new characters in part 3. You met the interesting Mr. Tweedy, who is the silversmith. I think he's called the journeyman silversmith, who's been called in to sort of take Johnny's place, to become the main working silversmith in the shop, with the hopes that he will marry one of the Lapham daughters so that they can secure their position with the business. And Mr. Tweedy's an interesting character, and I think you probably picked up on the fact that Johnny dislikes him greatly. I'm sure that Johnny is jealous that now he is the head silversmith, respected new addition to the business. And I think that he's described as having a queer, squeaky voice, and he seems to only come around at meal times so he can get a free meal out of the deal. So Johnny dislikes him terribly. I'm sure you picked up on that. Another new character that you met that's going to become a major character is Rab, the boy who works at the Boston Observer. So Johnny met him in part 3, and then he's going to interact with him again in part 4. And you didn't learn a lot about Rab in part 3. You will in part 4, but hopefully you picked up on the fact that he's not only is he older than Johnny, but he's much more mature than Johnny, and he's very even-tempered. He doesn't let his temper get the best of him like Johnny has been doing over and over. And so, he will, as I said, he will become someone who's a big influence on Johnny in a lot of good ways in the coming parts of the novel. You also learned that Mr. Hancock, who originally ordered the basin, when Johnny visits his counting house and is shamed by Mr. Hancock for not being able to write well because of his crippled hand, Johnny reveals to Mr. Hancock, well, I'm the one that burned my hand, making you a silver basin, and now you're just telling me to get out. And of course, Mr. Hancock feels sorry for him and basically gives him a sack of money. And it was a lot of money. And I'm sure as you were reading, you probably thought, this is great. Now Johnny can give this money to Mr. Lapham and they can help. Excuse me, not Mr. Lapham, but Mrs. Lapham, who runs the Lapham household. And maybe they can use this money for the things that they need to run the business and to, live, to buy food and supplies. But I'm sure you noticed that he just foolishly spent his money on unnecessary things like the huge meal at the tavern and the things that he bought for Scylla and Asana. It was thoughtful for him to think of them, but at the same time, he bought them things that were not necessary. And so he's just made some bad decisions in part 3, and he's really, by the end of part 3, after Mrs. Lapham, of course, doesn't understand how he's able to afford all of these things he comes home with that he bought with Mr. Hancock's money, she accuses him of stealing and predicts that he's going to be hung or, sent to jail. So he's really at his lowest point at the end of part 3. And in fact, he goes to his mother's grave and essentially cries, just absolutely breaks down and cries on his mother's grave and realizes, okay, I'm right where my mother said I would be if I needed to take my cup to Merchant Light. So he feels that God has turned his back on him. And he feels that he is at his lowest point ever. And we know that God does not turn his back on us, that he loves us and provides for us. But regardless, Johnny feels that he has no one and he's reached his lowest point. So he is, the plan at the end of part 3 is to go to Merchant Light with this silver cup, which supposedly proves that he is related to the very wealthy Merchant Light. So as you read part 4, you're going to be introduced to some more new characters. So you'll be introduced to Merchant Light, who's a very interesting character and receives Johnny a lot differently than Johnny predicts. I think you picked up on some of the information in the earlier parts where Johnny predicts that he sort of imagines that as soon as he brings his cup to Merchant Light, he's going to be accepted into the family and, he'll be wealthy and he'll be, able to live in comfort and wealth. And that's not really how things go. So you're introduced to Merchant Light and his cold-hearted yet stunningly beautiful daughter, Miss Lavinia. She's also a very interesting character. And then you'll get to know Rab a little bit more as well, who, as I said earlier, becomes just a wonderful role model for Johnny. So you'll be reading part 4, today and tomorrow. And it's a good bit of reading, but you only have 2 assignments today and tomorrow, if I'm remembering correctly, just math and literature. So, enjoy reading Johnny Tremain. You'll be reading, I believe, chapters 1 and 2 today, or maybe it's 1, 2, and 3. I have it listed on RenWeb, but you'll be able to finish part 4 from today and tomorrow and answer just a couple of questions on the sheet that I uploaded to RenWeb. You don't have to answer all of them, and the directions are very specific in RenWeb. So enjoy part 4, and we'll meet again later.